something I've read before. I'd like to watch the pages flip back again. Are you living? That's so actually.
Welcome back to May the 4th be with you. This is another grossly unprepared episode of Off Topic with your wonderful hosts. Hi, I'm Kylie Too Smart. We have the beautiful Jim over here.
Thank you. I go by beautiful.
Yes, beautiful. That is the title. And the shining gem of our podcast over here. Hello, India. Good morning.
Oh, thank you,
Hi.
Kylie. It's so good to be here.
Yes. We have been working on what we would like our titles to be because we're hilarious. So I think, Jimmy, you want to come with yours?
Title for the show?
No, your title. How we are addressing you because you are our historian of sorts, our economic genius of sorts. You bring so much knowledge, and it's really hard to define and boil down what your title would be. So,
Thanks.
for all of us out there, how would we think of you?
I guess I'd say I graduated with an economics degree and decided to pursue self-study of economic history. So I read over 350 books, mainly written in the 1950s and 40s when there was kind of an honest appraisal of our monetary system before it got so politicized.
That's a long title.
Yeah.
It's going to be hard to put.
How do you put that? So,
I mean,
well, do I identify as a PhD, but I've never gotten one. But,
same.
Okay.
Student of life. I love for India the goddess enthusiast extraordinaire.
I will gladly accept your title, Kylie.
Yes.
That's a
How
good
would
one.
you describe what your passions are in life and how you've brought your expertise to the show?
I'm a generalist. I'm definitely a generalist, and
she makes me call her General.
I'm really interested in feminism. I would definitely I think feminist to be in my title. I'm really interested in women's issues and women's studies issues.
Right, because you're not the goddess enthusiast extraordinaire for no reason. So maybe just a little background about some of your worldly travels and what you've hoped to accomplish in developing those relationships with ancient civilizations and maybe even not so ancient relationships with goddesses.
You know, I studied women's studies at MPC in the 90s, and it was really a fantastic program. And you could take, literature by and about women for your English 101. And so you could take all your general ed classes as women's studies classes. And I was so fortunate that I got to do that. And then now later in our semi-retirement, Jimmy and I have been traveling, and we found that we're just fascinated with what were the women doing in history. And that's the aspect of history that's been erased and is so hard to find. And so it's become this treasure hunt. We went to Turkey last year. We went to Greece, Crete, the island of Crete this year to learn more about
the Minoans.
The Minoans,
Yeah.
So it's kind of, my life has been made clear to me by living it. So over the course of going through life, I've discovered that I'm just really fascinated by women. And it's a fun thing to be fascinated by because we're the underdogs. We're the unreported. We're the ignored, the erased. We're more than half the population, or we used to be. And yet, women's contributions have been invisible. And so we just decided that our travels are not vacations. They're purpose-driven travel is what we came up with.
I love intentional living. That's something that I practice daily as well in almost all of my endeavors with the other podcasts that I do, even with how I've chosen to make money in the aspects of healing people and really having interactions that I find meaningful, emotional exchanges, asking people about their lives and really being a student of life. I call myself an existentialist, which is, just finding the deep meaning in existing. I think it's so interesting and very human thing that we do of trying to define what is valid and what isn't, what is real and what is not, especially when it comes to human existence. I think of all of the legal battles that are going on right now legislatively with even issues of like trans rights, and really the question of like, does this community exist? Do they deserve support? And we see these similar thought patterns all across our legislation, but especially pertaining to women as well of, do we get to validate the ways in which women exist, the choices they get to make, and we don't see nearly as many legislative restriction passed on men. How you feeling over there?
Very good.
Our resident man of the building. Hi.
Well, when I met India, that's when I learned about women's history because she was taking her classes at that time. And as a man, I'd really never put myself in the position of women in history. I was very into studying culture and how to produce psychologically healthy, fully developed human beings. And I hadn't seen that.
Eddie?
Yeah, I hadn't. Well,
You hadn't seen any. Sorry.
right.
Where are they?
I always pictured everyone as a brain floating in a body, and I wanted to know people's brains, and so I was never Luxist or in any way like that. I always said I'd rather hang out with a good heart.
That's very true. I've seen the women he's dated.
Yeah. I think she's Luxist. So, but anyway.
And you said I'm the prettiest.
But my saying was always that I'd rather hang out with somebody with a good heart than a good mind. Because once you don't have a good heart, for me, that's a deal killer, And so even if someone's productive or clever and stuff like that, like in high school, people would be amused and entertained by the put-down artist. And I didn't like put-down artists. I thought that was not... I even did a whole study on insult culture. When did putting people down become the main joke telling of sitcoms?
I love that you bring that up because especially I'll talk for me, like in the Black culture, the idea of the dozens and the yo mama jokes and really learning where those types of interactions come from. And it's really deeply rooted back into slavery. And you don't really understand some of the roots of these nursery rhymes or the jokes. And, in the community, it's well, we do this as a thickening of the skin to prepare you for what you're going to face outside in the outside world. Same thing with colloquializing the N-word, which is a huge debate, right? Of, if we take this word and sort of protect ourselves with it, and you're going to hear it in these other fashions so that it's not just an immediate connection to murder, and you are able to emotionally regulate, because a lot of the survivalism with in many communities of color is the emotional regulation to how you respond to people trying to get that emotional rise out of you. And so a lot of the interactions that I've seen with the insult culture, even with comedians of okay, can you take this joke? Because if you can't take this joke, how are you going to hack it in real life? If you can't go through some of the hazing and make it to what your end goal is, if you don't have that focus, how are you going to overcome all of these external negative stereotypes? So you have to learn how to hear these things and not internalize them. So I think that's an interesting way of looking at it, but also,
Yeah. And we all learned on Facebook and social media more about the Black experience and the talk that every mother has to have with her Black son about the police and all that stuff. I thought that was really an important aspect of social media, that we learn more about what it's like to be a woman with Me Too. We learn more about what it's like to be the parent of a Black child. That's the thing I love about social media, was how there was more communication between people who weren't necessarily communicating before.
And it's culture, and when I was learning women's history, I immediately wanted to learn about the history of male feminism And it turns out the two biggest male feminists I found in history were John Stuart Mill, who was supposedly the smartest man who ever lived with an IQ of 245, and the other man who wrote a book on women's rights was Frederick Douglass. And so both of them were like kind of my idols of like, wow, look, you have to be a pretty smart guy to seek out women's equality. But one of the things I learned right away was, my upbringing is gender slurs. Is that don't cry like a little girl, pussy, bitch, all that, and how even the sports culture that's the worst thing is it's a slur because you're being taught you don't want to ever put yourself in the position of being that person. And so slurs are to establish second-class citizenry. And I found that why isn't sexism treated the same as racism is because sexism is in every race. And then I realized that, wow, if the world came together in gender equality, then that transcends race. And even Frederick Douglass said that elevating women was elevating half the human family. He felt, because there was the debate for him was whether to give black men voting rights, and white women weren't getting them. And he said, look, I will dedicate my life to women's rights if you support this passage of male suffrage for African Americans. And he died at a women's rights conference.
He did. He kept his promise. He spent his entire life fighting for women to get the vote.
So I learned a lot. It just set me off on this whole course. Indy was involved with a lot of the women's conferences. She had Angela Davis spoke, Ryan Eisler spoke, we had Renee Hobbs from Media Literacy spoke, and Indy was involved with usually driving them to and from places, which is...
I volunteered for that job.
It's the
so
coolest.
I got 20 minutes alone with the most amazing women in the world to just talk with them on the drive.
Don't you love that? That is something that I consider myself to be very blessed to be in the circles that I am, because I get to learn on a whole nother level the people that I'm interacting with. And it's so funny because sometimes you'll be in situations where you're like, oh, I'm giving them the car ride. And then you learn all of these other things that come along with their experiences. And it's a beautiful humanizing process when you sit with someone and actually discuss what their life is like, because they're not the sound bite, they're not just the speeches that they're giving. There's so much that comes along with
they're
that.
A real person.
Real
Yes.
people doing real people things.
And this was all in the late 90s.
Yeah, Angela Davis is such a nice person. She's actually a really nice, accessible person. And she would come always with her friend Bettina Apteker, I think is her name, and from Santa Cruz. And they would always come together to the women's conference here at MPC. I wish they still did it.
I can't tell you how jealous I am that you had that experience and opportunity, because Angela Davis was such a beacon of light for me, particularly being in this area in Monterey as a woman of color, and learning about the Soledad brothers, learning about Angela Davis's role, learning about her history and where she was, growing up, and her time spent in France, and what her experiences have been of seeing these bombings as a child, or as a young adult, and coming back to the States armed with a different type of, I would say, social warfare and ideas coming from, the French Revolution, and really being able to make the ties to civil rights movements and what it takes to actually unify, and what it means to tap into groups like the Black Panther Party, and to make your stance known publicly, what the risks are tied to that, and then dedicating your life to topics like prison reform, and being able to speak on that as a woman.
That's what she talked about when she came to MPC. What year was it?
Probably 1999 or 2000.
Yeah.
And there had just been the explosion of the prison population.
That was the issue that she came and she talked about. And I think the statistic at the time was that we had gone from 200,000 people in prison to 2 million. And she was just saying how, and now we're up to 2.5 million or more. And just as a little side note, last week we were talking about women's issues.
Huh.
So we get on that topic a lot. So we were talking about ownership of land, and that I was saying how I had studied women's studies in the 90s, and we had learned the statistic that women own 1% of the world's property. So I looked it up since our last show, and guess how much women own now?
How much do women own now?
Less than 2%.
What happened?
Hey,
So in the last 25 years, we've gone from 1% to possibly 1.5%.
Growth. Look at the growth, people. May the 4th be with you. These stormtroopers out here are not playing. They're not playing fair at all. So let's talk about how we get to a point where over half the world's population is owning so little. What happened? What is the propaganda for women, particularly in positions of power and ownership? Jim?
well, the witch burnings and all that in Europe was a lot of people just targeting wealthy women who had property that they wanted, and they just like spread the rumor. And that again is when our history of religious law, of allowing religion to determine the law that we have to live by, results in a lot of bloodshed and a lot of death and stuff like that. And, hopefully as humanity, we're moving past religious law and we're getting into civil law. And civil law is where everybody can hold their own beliefs and we can all live together. Unfortunately, in time right now, we see a backsliding into religious law, stacking of the Supreme Court, who is upholding religious law in violation of the Constitution. The First Amendment was actually written with freedom of religion, with the purpose that no federal money, no government money can go for religious education. LBJ, believe it or not, that all really ties with civil rights, because LBJ had to make a deal with the Catholic Coalition that he would pay for their busing and all their school lunches in order for them to vote for the Civil Rights Act in the 1960s. And then now they're moving towards school vouchers in the hope that they can fund religious indoctrination into children. And that's what James Madison wrote a whole essay called The Remonstrance that says, hey, if you allow government money to go for religious education, what you're going to have is a bunch of religions fighting for power over government to control the money so that they can indoctrinate religious and bring back religious law. And so even this anti-abortion movement is basically religious law being re-implemented, and those who support taking away women's rights are actually in violation of the Constitution. The Constitution was specifically set up to separate church from state, and we've got that problem. But I mean, we got to learn these lessons again. No one knows their history. I kind of feel like Americans don't respect history because they're not surrounded by it.
Which is hilarious to me, because to me, I can step out of my door and look around and see it steeped in the culture. This is May the 4th be with you. It's a very Star Wars steeped episode, but I look at that because it is a prime example of a piece of media that is widely culturally consumed. And so as like a piece of Americana, I would say that Star Wars definitely as a series is a framework that is easily accessible for individuals to look at. And there's so much indigenous representation within Star Wars, even down to Princess Leia's hair buns. Those are taken straight from the Hopi tribe. And there's so much, even in, Queen Amidala's makeup and her garb, and even more recently, if you're looking, there's so much in terms of fighting fascism and what happens when you have such a major split of just light side, dark side, religious order, who gets what power, what is the power struggle, what does the fight look like, and why. And it's the the example of the levels of destruction that we are willing to take in the argument or for the sake of power. When you see like the literal death machine, the Death Star, the planet killer, and we are at a point now in our history where nuclear warfare is something that hangs over all of us, and that is a planetary killer, and we are killing our planet in small ways for sure every day, but also in large ways. And I think part of the reason why there aren't more recognition for women is that as people who are birthing and feeling the pain of what it takes to give life and support life, I think we are a little more closely tied into Mother Nature and the natural cycles, because we experience cycles a little more directly just in our own hormonal
We
being.
can't escape. No, we can't escape the natural cycles. I think women always get associated more with nature, but we can't escape it. Whereas men, I think, can live more in denial about their animal nature, maybe a little bit more.
Ooh.
Yeah, I mean, not a lot of women, retreat to a cave and go without bathing for as long as they can and think they're going to stay healthy. But I mean, there are men that are just sitting there going, I don't have a menstrual cycle, and that makes it easy for me to not bathe. Whereas women, I mean, I have daughters and I have married a wife, and which is my partner, and we got married on the spring equinox, which is for us the day of equality, where night and day are equal. And I say I am a man tossed on a sea of estrogen. I mean, I recognize that, and I keep a bar of dark chocolate hidden in cases of emergency, because it works.
I love that. A man tossed on the sea of estrogen.
Well, with a lot of daughters, you have a lot of people going through adolescence, which is hard.
Oh, and then on menopause on the other side.
And then I got,
which is just as hard as women go through a lot because of our biology, and whether a woman has a child or not, she still bears the whole biological burden of the female reproductive system. And so women suffer a lot. And I remember one of our daughters, when she had just started her cycle, she said, "Oh, I get why women get the seat on the bus now." She's like, "I always wondered why men hold doors open for us or give us their seat on the bus."
Because you can be in pain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But she grew up in Mexico. I don't know if that's an American thing. Yeah.
I love the bus because no, I actually had gotten in trouble in high school. I went to a private high school for a while. I, got in on a scholarship, and it was a wonderful exchange of just lifestyles. And I had taken my friends on the bus after school to see a movie, and on this particular, it's a very small town, and it's like a wealthy area, so it's not like the bus was really like open to everyone. It was literally just us on the bus, if that tells you like how small it was. And I got in trouble because the parents felt that I had endangered their children by bringing them to the theater. They would have sent a chauffeur. They would have sent a driver. And to me, that was just so mind-boggling. I was like, we're at an age where we should be able to figure out how to get from A to B, and also to know how to get there safely. And it's like, also, I love these people and they're my friends, and would I be endangering them the same way I'm endangering myself? And then also, am I the danger? Because I was labeled the danger at that point.
Public transportation.
Yes.
Edgy.
Edgy. So edgy. From Monterey. Monterey public transportation system.
The mean streets of Monterey.
Yes, the mean, cruel streets of Monterey. And so it just, like, really, you get this echelon and this elitism that you see also represented in Star Wars, of, like, who's wealthy, who's moneyed, the types of ships they have, the type of technology they have. And I always love the kind of equivalence of people who are fighting for equality always being dirty, or that having a relationship with the earth makes you dirty. And I have a lot of relationships with like dirty kids, people who are still choosing to live in nature and in accordance to natural laws versus trying to strip and eradicate and literally wash that dirt away so that they can be clean. What do we think about those types of ideas of distancing, and does that actually mean that you are more evolved?
Yeah,
way.
I think that one of the most liberating things that happened in my life was when I fell out of the cultural ideal. And I figured out that the cultural ideal wasn't psychologically healthy, that you could be successful in the eyes of your society and be unhappy. And, I grew up with Simon and Garfunkel, and they sang a song called Richard Cory. And Richard Cory's the the wealthiest man, and he is celebrated by everybody, and he ultimately kills himself. And we know that. We know people who have everything, supposedly, and it isn't...
They're not healthy.
They're not healthy.
No. And getting back to this idea of dirty, this is this, I was calling it capitalist mythology or corporate mythology, is in the corporate mythology, if we were to listen to the commercial culture of what they tell us, we're dirty, we're stinky, we're too hairy. I mean...
I was like, all women across the board. I cannot tell you, so just in my personal practice, women come to me and apologize for having body hair. I'm just like, what? But also, I massage everyone, so if it's okay for me to massage one hairy leg, why would your hairy leg be any different just because of your gender? It's boggling to me. Wild. And I just want to reach into their mind and be like, let's just get rid of that idea because it's not serving you, and you have so many bigger things to worry about than whether or not your massage therapist is offended by your body hair.
Our daughter says, how can I get in trouble for something I didn't do? I didn't shave my legs. How is that an issue,
Yeah. And let's see. Oh, bad breath.
Yeah.
Right? We're dirty, stinky, too hairy. We have bad breath. I don't know. Corporations want us to believe that our body is just really wrong in its natural state.
Yeah, wash it with chemicals. Get rid of that. I don't know what you're doing over there, but just put some bleach on it.
Exactly.
Literally.
Yeah.
Terrible.
Right, like people that need to have a car for status, a home for status, and things like that. I need a car that gets me from A to B. I don't need a car that people look at. I don't want the red car. I don't want the sports car like that. And for people to think they have to purchase their identity, I think that that's the myth. I think you are who you are when you stand buck naked in the forest, and so it's the skills you have, the knowledge you have, and the heart and soul that you have. That's why I say I like people with good hearts rather than good brains, because I want the well-intentioned person, not the person who's,
the corporate
clever.
Mythology it's a trap. It's fake. It's not.
Well, and we were talking about Star Wars, and what you learn right away when you become culturally sensitive is that it's all a construct. And so all those things that you're speaking of were purposely built into the storyline. And so I watch TV all the time, and I'm like, wow, is the African-American man going to be the one who gets injured? Is the lesbian the one that's going to be horribly killed some way, even though she was the hero in the last scene? And then you start to see these patterns, and then you see what the cultural norms they're pushing. And I think that if you're media literate, you can read TV because you can deconstruct what they put together. But if you're not media literate, then you just watch it. And if you watch it, you are so susceptible. People are like, can't you just watch the movie and not comment on it? And you're like...
what would the point be of just watching and not... Isn't the point to have the social commentary, to have the...
But they're not on the level of participation, of cultural participation. These are just people who are sponges taking it in, and they don't even realize... you ask them, do you exercise free will? And they're like the first ones that are yes. The people that know how culturally molded our beliefs are like, no, I don't exercise free will. I'm constantly being bombarded with thoughts and beliefs that I adopt from my surroundings. And the ignorant are the only ones who believe that somehow they're beyond influence, that they can't be influenced because they know their own mind. They pick which channel they watch. And sadly enough, they're the ones that need the most.
But if you dig a little bit deeper, almost every
awakening.
channel is owned by the same people. So
Yeah, I call it trying to escape a room of 500 doors where all the doors have been built by the same person. So you think this illusion of choice, I've got 500 channels to choose from. Yes, and they've all been through the same filter. You know, a media is highly censored by, they call them gatekeepers, they call them agenda setters. So, I mean, you know, people have to have this terminology to even start to deconstruct what they're watching.
Yes. Well, speaking of what you're watching, let's take a quick moment to thank the studio that we're in for providing us a space to exercise our free will and to be able to give us a platform to share our thoughts on this particular day and time on Earth. So thank you, AMP, out here for giving the people a choice and a voice.
You know, we've really been investigating public access and on cable TV, and right now everybody is saying cable is over, that cable TV is over, that there's less people subscribing to it and stuff like that. But everybody's still getting cable internet. That the cable is still being run through the public street. We, as the public, still control the cable companies and the terrestrial broadcasters. They can't get to everyone's household except through our public property. And that gives us the right to control them and oversee them. And you got to remember, corporations are highly censored by private individuals with private interests, and they are not out here for the public good. They have no transparency, and they are only self-serving. The only way for us to hope that media results in a better society is as the public, we oversee it. But there's going to be overseers.
AMP is truly public media, and they're running programming like Free Speech TV. They're running Democracy Now! And these are some of these news shows that don't have any corporate sponsorship. So there is some...
Right, I'll say it right now.
Grassroots terrestrial broadcasters.
Still happening.
Go.
But people, I called the cable access channel in Davis to find out what they've got going, and the woman was like, "Oh, well, you can put your show on our website, but don't worry about the channel. Nobody watches cable." So
Big gasp. And also, is it true that nobody's watching cable, or is it just older generations and then we just discount people who are older? That's so rude. We're so ageist. How dare we?
I think that's what it is. I think it's the older generations still watch cable, and
They're like, nobody but old women's watching cable. Look at us women's being eradicated already. It's terrible.
Well, we've already been through this, and it's a parallel comparison, is that in the year 2000, we were fighting against the radio dial takeover by a company called Clear Channel, and they went from 50 radio stations to 1,250 radio stations in 5 years. And when I was saying, hey, this is a problem, everybody like, no one listens to the radio anymore. We have Pandora, we have the internet, no one listens to the radio. And I said, there are people who listen to the radio, and they're being radicalized by Michael Savage, by Sean Hannity, by Roger Hedgecock, by Rush Limbaugh. And sure enough,
don't forget Dr. Laura.
Dr. Laura, it turns out that a third of the population, it can be reached by radio, and they're a voting bloc now, and we've got problems. And now they're abandoning cable to, when good people leave an institution, it is taken over by fools and con men.
But Kylie made a really good point, because nobody listened to the radio, is what they said 20 years ago. But you know who the nobodies were back then?
Who were the nobodies?
Poor people and working class.
Yeah.
It was the poor and the working class, put on the radio, like in their workplace. people who are commuting to and from work might put the radio on in their
Right.
car.
And so now maybe cable's only being watched by a demographic of 55-year-old and older. But you know what? They're going to find the Rush Limbaugh on there. They're going to find the Roger Hedgecock. If the liberal left who
Because Fox-
believes they're modern and, I only do the internet and stuff like that, if those people all say, I'm abandoning this institution, then you're leaving all those poor people who can't read media. They only watch it, and they don't know they're being influenced. They think they're exercising free will, and those people will be convinced that there's reptiles in charge of the government and that they're eating babies, and the QAnon is on its way back.
Well, it's really interesting because when Clear Channel took over basically the entire radio dial 20-something years ago, they put on this guy in the middle of the night when people are the most suggestible because they're tired. This guy called Art Bell, and he was a conspiracy theorist. And so he would be on for hours and hours in the middle of the night, and he was one of the first. He was probably the very first conspiracy theorist to be mass.
Well, I started
distributed.
taping cable TV, Fox News, around the year 2000 because I said, oh my God, they're using cult indoctrination techniques on their audience. For one thing is that when you're sleep deprived and you're hungry, you're not in your right state of mind. And what it does is it raises your level of suggestibility. And so you can start to convince people, because like even cults are kind of like timeshares. If they get you for 3 days, they can break you down. They will break you down.
Timeshares aren't 3 days.
But
Those
it's
are
still,
like
they
6
exhaust
hours.
you over,
Right.
they won't let you go. And that's how you get people to change their mind. I mean, it's interrogation tactics, it's cult indoctrination, and you can actually do those on a level of that you can on TV or on the radio. And the people, if they're not educated to it, they won't recognize what's happening to them.
Well, you're talking about media literacy education, and the thing to know is that every other English-speaking nation has media literacy part of their core curriculum from kindergarten through high school. And so Australia, England,
Japan, Britain.
I remember getting courses too, and even through college. And one of the favorite exercises, at least for my classes, we would just talk about the ads that we heard that morning, or whatever we saw that night, and just discuss, okay, so what were they trying to get you to buy? Why were they trying to get you to buy it? What was their highest selling point? Were they
Their tactics.
Yeah, what were their
tactics?
Was it to make you feel bad about how you naturally exist, and so you needed to correct it?
Or was it because a celebrity does it, so you want to be like them? And what they found more is that if you present things where it's a stop loss, people act immediately. And if it's a perceived gain, people will put it off. So if you want people to do something, you have to say, you better do this now, or something bad is happening.
there will be a loss.
There will be a loss. But if you say, do this now because something good will happen, people will put that off. That's why supplies are running short. The sale's about to end.
So how do you differentiate media literacy and just like propaganda?
Well,
What is the difference there between,
just
freedom?
like what you were saying, that you have a class and they ask you about what you saw, and you sit there, and the exercise is to analyze what you've seen. And it was like the 5 W's. What was it? What were they selling? Why are they selling it? How are they selling it? There's all these questions you can ask about.
Well, pre
What you've seen.
World War II, in high school, you learned rhetoric, and rhetoric is the basis of all education because it's critical thinking skills. And so you learn what a fallacy is, what a false equivalence is. People say, this is like that. And you're like, no, it's not. But people who aren't educated that have never been given the driving manual of their mind, are easily misled. And there's false premises. I mean, I watch TV all the time, and they're saying, because this is true, this and this and this is true. And I'm like, that premise is already wrong, so everything, the structure you built off it. But I can say this is like this because they're both yellow, but that doesn't mean every quality they share. And so that's why you have to really look with media literacy and stuff that if people start comparing groups of people to insects, you know, I mean, there's all the telltale signs that genocide is coming, you know.
Any comparison to human beings to any sort of vermin is a clear indicator of genocidal intent.
And I may say that in my personal speech, you know, not that I would, but it's another thing to have it broadcast on the radio or TV. There's the violation. I have free speech rights, but anything that's broadcast is a license holder. And so I'll tell you something right now that can't be said on TV. Rupert Murdoch should lose his broadcast license. MSNBC should lose their broadcast license. Anyone who says that on TV right now would be fired because they contracted out of their First Amendment rights. They are not free to speak. They're heavily censored. If they say the wrong thing, they will be blacklisted, never work in the industry again. But me, myself, I can say, hey, why don't we tax advertising? Why don't we have media ownership limits? See, these are things that I can tell you on public access that cannot be said on commercial TV, because commercial speech is paid speech. It's contractual speech. It's not First Amendment speech. They've commercialized the First Amendment and tried to tell everybody that they somehow are just like us.
Well, like,
and they're not.
In Bernie Sanders' history, he's talked a lot about limiting the amount of media stations any one company should be allowed to. So that's called ownership limits. And so you saw the commercial media when Bernie Sanders was running, they spent 2 hours on an empty podium one time. All the networks filmed an empty podium waiting for Trump to come out and give a speech while Bernie Sanders was talking.
Leading a crowd of 10,000 people.
And Bernie Sanders was not even talking about ownership limits on corporate media, but he had talked about it 15 years ago.
But they already blacklisted him from commercial media.
So he was just, it was funny because you would listen to NPR and they'd be like, so the election is heating up and there's Hillary Clinton and there's Trump and there's others. And I used to say that, oh yeah, I guess Bernie Sanders, like his name is Other Candidates. That was his official name.
Yes, the others. So who is in charge of regulating commercial media?
FCC, supposedly.
But what happened was with FCC, they made a wrong opinion. They said, oh, the FCC exists to protect spectrum rights so that someone doesn't broadcast on the same spectrum and interfere with somebody's signal. And they said, oh, but with cable TV, there's no spectrum and there's no need for spectrum rights because everybody has a different cable channel. So the FCC doesn't regulate cable. The FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, regulates cable. And so they've divided our major media into two commissions, you know. And so that's one of the things that they've done a falsehood on us, is that whether you're cable or terrestrial, you're still using the public streets to run your cable or run it along the lines or the public airwaves.
But the FCC hasn't been doing their job in a long time.
They can't even fill the position. The recent woman who got appointed to head the FCC, the industry was so hard on her in just torturing her personally that she stepped down, and she'd been a community rights advocate the whole time, and she was very well qualified for the job, but they knew that the other thing, the FCC exists because Congress doesn't have the expertise to regulate the broadcast companies. So then you form a commission that then has the expertise, and a commission becomes a quasi-legislative judicial branch. And that's one of the things, is that they're making laws and they're enforcing laws, and that violates the division of power that's supposed to be of the three branches. So
I was going to say, because my point was, well, then who checks the FCC? Because we're having like a real Marshall Mathers moment of, you know, the FCC won't let me be or let me MTV me, so let me see. They're trying to shut me down on MTV. And we're going through the same process of media literacy, freedom of speech being violated. So who then regulates the regulators?
The FCC never goes after anybody specifically as an individual. Howard Stern has never been persecuted by the FCC. No individual. It's the license holder that is called into question, and they want to pretend it's personalities, but is the license holder fulfilling their community standards?
Right. That's one of those corporate mythology things.
Yeah.
Is that the FCC will go after an artist? Totally
It doesn't exist.
Not true. They'll say to MTV, like, "Hey, you hold a license, and you broadcasted an artist who said pee pee poo poo or whatever during the day, right? And there's limits on what you can say when children are in the audience, so it's like 10 in the morning till 10 at night or whatever. So this idea that like Howard Stern got in trouble with the FCC, he never did.
No, Viacom.
It was Viacom committed...
They broadcast his stuff. There's time, place, and manner restrictions. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. That's time, place, and manner. I can go out in the street and yell fire, and it's okay. Nobody's going to get trampled. But if I do it in a theater, crowded theater, then I've actually endangered the public. There's other things of time, place, and manner of if there's children in the audience.
You see, so the artist does whatever, but it's just up to the company if they decide to broadcast it.
They gave them the platform.
Yeah, so they get in trouble for broadcasting it, and that's it. And so there's a real purposeful misunderstanding about that whole thing.
Understanding the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law, and how we can manipulate that.
Right, and you got to remember that corporations don't respect the spirit of the law. The whole legal profession exists, the majority of the legal profession exists to get around the law. They find a law and then they want to find a loophole. So these are lawbreakers and unlawful corporations.
Well, they want to portray this idea, this misunderstanding that artists are being attacked by the FCC, because what they really want is the media corporation wants to buy more stations, or they want to own more channels.
And they want to get rid of the FCC.
Right. And so they get this public fervor going of like, hey, my favorite artist is being censored by the FCC. The FCC should have less power over broadcasting. And so then Clear Channel can go from 1,250 radio stations to 1,500 radio stations.
But it's the ignorance of the public that makes them so easily manipulated, because the commercial media is not going to teach you the architecture of the system so that you know they're in violation or how they're tilting the playing field so that they win every time. And that's the biggest crime that's going on.
But it's purposeful misinformation.
Yeah, I mean, the commercial media is not trying to educate the public. I mean, you talk to somebody who's watched the nightly news for 40 years and you say, oh, tell me about the original Social Security Act, tell me about the original Income Tax Act that was 17 pages long. Have they ever talked about that? I mean, they'll spend more time on a Russian dossier and Trump's connections to everything rather than just teach you about healthcare and different proposals that are put forward. They
I've
don't
had
want you to
so
know.
many older Americans who are news watchers say to me, what do you think about the fentanyl crisis of all this fentanyl coming from Mexico? Because it all comes from Mexico. Well, no. Fentanyl is a pharmaceutical product that is used in the hospitals, and, it obviously doesn't all come from Mexico, because we had that.
No, it comes from the police.
In San Jose.
Union in San Jose.
Yes,
we found out
that one woman.
We've seen the picture of what people look like that deal fentanyl, and it's women whose hair don't move.
It's a blonde lady whose hair that doesn't move.
So women can be villains too. Look at this. Representation matters.
But isn't that great?
White women can
that's
be drug
representation.
Dealers too.
White women can be drug dealers too. Thank you for the selective moral outrage. I think this is a good time for us to take a quick commercial break.
Yeah.
There it is. And we're back. Welcome to the second half of Off Topic. We're going to continue on with our lovely branding of things you can't say on television.
And I wanted to mention that we are filming the show on May the 4th.
Yes.
So May the 4th be with you.
And also with you.
And we have Kylie, our resident
I was like, nerd,
Ewok?
our oh,
Wookie? I don't know. What are
Chewbacca. We're doing our Chewy. We're repping our Chewy
Okay,
onesie today.
okay,
It's
yeah.
great. It came from Ross, so you know. Shout out Ross. I do love them. I'm a Ross queen for sure. I was like, look, Jim would be our resident Yoda.
I do speak backwards at times.
Yes.
Yes.
Wax philosophically. And tell us about ourselves from the future and past.
I think one of the things I really like is the evolution of language. And I think that being down in Mexico and realizing that all things have a gender, which is not something in English we have, and how in Spanish you can drop the subject of a sentence. You just say, the vase broke. But in English, we're very much into like, who broke the vase? The vases don't just break. And I think that the structure of our language is very much into cause and effect. I think that's why it's kind of promoted science, where they're just like, things happen, and we're just like, why are things happening? And I think it makes it very, we want to place the blame, even if there's no blame to place. I think that they drop the subject in their speech a lot because they're an honor culture, so you don't want to like offend somebody by mentioning that they did it, whereas
or embarrass them.
And because it's an honor culture, and we don't really have an honor culture or an honor society. One of the things is about honor cultures is like the Asian countries are honor cultures, and you can sue people in junior high for defamation or slander, like if they lie about you or spread a rumor.
In junior high?
You can actually have a court case against someone because it's that offensive to their social norms. Whereas, like we were talking about insult culture, is here you can get away with insulting, whereas in other cultures, you know, I will do...
No, it's, in Mexico, it's criminal. It's not...
It's not a civil fine. Yeah, here you do it and they say, oh, okay, you have to pay this fine. In other cultures, you go to jail.
If you talk shit about somebody.
As a capitalist society, that we have the quote unquote freedom to be jerks if you can afford to be
to pay your way out of it. Yeah. So yeah.
Well, also in Japanese, they drop the subject, or the subject of a sentence comes at the end of the sentence. So that's also an honor culture that doesn't specifically name who did what necessarily in a sentence.
Do you find honor cultures tend to be less individualistic?
Yes.
More collectivist identity. So it's more about getting along rather than...
Which humans have a hard time getting along. I mean, we should kind of make that the center of our culture. And if we don't make getting along with each other as the center of our culture, then what is the center of our culture? And it's, well, you know, our culture right now is divisive. It's what team... I kind of think that competition isn't really natural to human beings. I think that that's why they indoctrinated with all these sports. And I think that goes along with the gender slurs that are hurled at little boys, like don't cry like a little girl, you know, I'm gonna make you my bitch, don't be a pussy. I mean, all those things are just to...
Like, be a pussy, they're strong, flexible,
right.
And
doing
really
the
tough.
work, really tough.
But it was just to reinforce women's second-class status, that they're, and as a little boy, don't ever put yourself in the position of a woman and see the world, you know? Yeah, it's just... You know, and these are the cultural... We talk about a lot of cultural constructs with propaganda and media and stuff like that, and people don't realize how influenced they are by the language they speak. They don't realize they are influenced by everything they watch. That's why to be a participant in your own development, you have to pick what you watch on TV. Like, murder is not entertainment, you know. There's a group that says, hey, I had a loved one killed, and now it's a cold case that everybody's watching on TV. It's not funny to me. And the thing is that I don't watch those things because I don't want that to be in my thought stream. I don't watch horror movies because... that's not where I'm going with my mind. I'm a mental construct that I'm participating in. People are just like, well, what's the next channel going to do to me? They don't even think that. They're just like, oh. I mean, I really am... I wish people were turned on to, like, their development I think that they're like partially human because they never thought to take the controls of their mind.
I think that's really interesting. We've had a lot of callbacks to our previous episode, and this one as a recurring theme of what it means to doom scroll and to have access to the quote unquote dark web. And what are the ethical ramifications of not having the internet be regulated in a way, because it's very difficult to keep young people from having access. And early on, the internet was just a helter-skelter of just violence. We saw a lot of propaganda. We were able to access a lot from a very young age. I was able to see beheadings, able to see riots without, context, and consuming as a child the same way I would watch Cartoon Network, the dark web, is really damaging because then you don't know what is real and what is not, and what are the moral ramifications for having, death and torture be part of entertainment. And it's not new. We've seen coliseums and we've seen, men fighting lions as forms of entertainment. And then even for me, it's like, this is one of the reasons why I don't really watch football, just as an industry. And I see how it has benefited many people in many communities in terms of actually building wealth. But we are paying people to put their lives on the line, to injure themselves for the sake of ad revenue, for the sake of entertainment. And we don't talk about the sacrifices that those people have to make in order to bring that to us. So,
yeah, well, and I think that movie Concussion taught, all of us so much about that. That was incredible, about the catastrophic brain injuries that football players are sustaining.
And that helmets don't prevent it. It's your brain banging up against your cranium that is injuring it, and the helmet is on the outside just to give you this perceived safety that doesn't exist. And the industry, those are all disposable human beings on the playing field, and they want to be there because, their dad signed them up for Pop Warner when they were 4 years old. And they've got some. Our society is so demasculated. They think football is male. It's like, well, I watch football with my dad. It makes me a man, and it's just so. It's sad. It's sad.
It's
really
so
sad.
Exploitive because it's a whole bunch.
But I don't want to do that to my friends. My friends are all invested. They know more about the 1967 Packers than they know about the Internal Revenue Service. I mean, they don't know anything about politics.
Who really knows about the Internal Revenue Service?
Because
you don't want to know.
Right. But they never focused, and so they can be easily misled. I could come in and go, football is all about throwing the football through the basket, and that's how smart they are on the tax code. I could say, and that's, and I could say, oh yeah, you hit it with a 9-iron, the baseball, and that's how a home run happens. That's how politically savvy these people are, who've spent years, hours and hours watching professional sports and walking away with absolutely nothing of content other than they can talk to other people who share the same religion.
Yeah, but now that we know about the catastrophic brain injuries, when you look at football, you're looking at doomed men, mostly of color, who are going to have a very short, very painful life. And so, yeah, I can't watch football anymore.
Yeah, so
not that I ever did.
No, so it's also looking at the reframing, because we talk about slavery and propaganda, and even because people will make the argument that they're very well paid, and
in college,
I was like, are they very well paid? Do they have ownership? If you look at the coaches who actually is running, and you look at representation, we see over and over and over again, as soon as people start gaining leverage to control the sport that they have made their lives, people will change the rules. And so then it's like a losing uphill battle. And it's just like, okay, so when are we going to just have enough of this particular type of structure and focus on some other things? And, there's always going to be the pushback of, though, this is an opportunity that I can have to provide. So
I think Jimmy would like to see the IRS games.
Well, the thing is that
I don't know about the viewership of the IRS games.
we could use the tactics of attention grabbing and stuff to explain the tax code. We could apply our media genius to make it entertaining, as they do to these things. How much money do they spend on the flashing lights and the drone and stuff? And look at the football field. I mean, you have the prostitutes dressed up as sexual objects on the side cheering for the guys, and the only time they ever mention the woman is when they throw the Hail Mary pass at the end of the game.
can we also talk about the fact that cheerleaders are not paid as athletes?
What?
Oh,
They're not?
You're
No,
right.
they are not. They are paid as entertainment. So it seems wild to me that they will invest like years and years and years of gymnastics. They still have to go through the same rigorous training. They have to get up. They have to run. They have to do makeup. They have to do their hair. They have to have their outfits, which, footballers are getting all of their pads. They got their full body tights. They've got their jerseys. And you have cheerleaders who are being thrown into the air, who are doing just
Incredible things.
right. Hurting their knees. There's a lot of risk that comes along with what they do, but the payoff and what they are told is that, well, you have the option and you have the exposure to these men, and you can pick one of them as a husband, and you'll be supported and set for life, and that's your role.
Yeah, in Monterey, they had a education crisis where they lost 5,000 students in 5 years, and so they lost the teachers, and they said, if you have a bachelor's degree, please take the CBS test and become a substitute teacher. And I went into a class, and the teacher hadn't left learning what I was supposed to teach. Lesson plan. And so it turned out to be the coach of the high school football team, I think, and I didn't know that. And so there was a group of
That was the teacher. So he was
Yeah.
filling in. It was like a health class or something. And so he was covering for the high school football coach.
Right. And so there were a bunch of guys in the back of the room, and they were all like goofing around and stuff like that. And I said, what do we want to talk about today? And they said, why should women get paid the same in the WNBA as the NBA if they can't dunk a basketball? This was back in the 90s, right? And I said, oh, that's such a good one. I'm going to write, why isn't sexism treated the same as racism? And I did this thing, and then I said...
So you wrote it on the chalkboard.
Mm-hmm.
So
then I went into the whole spiel, but the ultimate was that the cheerleaders are actually more socially beneficial than the football players because they can cheer for a better world.
Aww,
And they're morale builders.
They are morale builders.
And they're not violent and everything. And I just said, really, when I look down there, I see that the cheerleaders are more important and their skills are higher than anyone on that football field. And they came up at the end of class and they were like, why did you do that to us? And the girls in the class just, thank God, our teacher's so misogynistic that I hate this class. You were the best substitute teacher ever.
I'm going to take it even to another scope of why don't we teach and pay the marching band members the same way that we do as athletes. They do incredible feats on the field. It takes so much strength to carry around those instruments, to execute the dance moves. There's so much athleticism that goes along with being a marching band member. And we don't nearly give them as much clout as they deserve. So that's always an interesting field. It's like, why don't we have more competitive band? I would watch that 10 times over football.
Well, I remember when they tried to take football's popularity internationally, and the thing is that football costs a lot. You have to have a uniform, you have to have helmets, shoulder pads, you have to have the goal posts,
Insurance.
Right. And that's why soccer is so popular around the world, because it's cheap. You just need a ball and 4 rocks, and you basically have goals set up, and you can play soccer. And with football, it's just such an elitist thing, and they try to take it worldwide, and they've been trying to promote the Super Bowl worldwide, and it's really just a disservice to humanity that so much resources are even put into this dead end of a cultural pursuit. And men are like, oh, you don't understand, it taught me teamwork and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, it taught you hierarchy and got you ready for the battlefield, but, ultimately you're just fodder.
what was it? Land acquisition? What was it?
Oh yeah, and George Carlin does a great routine
Yeah.
about the difference between football and baseball and stuff like that.
He
And
called it like a militaristic land acquisition violent game of capital. I don't know. He
And
had some great George Carlin
and you
rant. That
think
was awesome.
you think of the dumb jock as a caricature of of humanity, but the thing is, the dumb jock is a person who's suffering from traumatic brain injury. I mean, you're actually talking about a person whose brain has been injured. That's why they're the dumb jock. I mean, we even like incorporated that they're a personality. They're not a personality. They're an injured human being, and we should like. I guess they're just part of the social sacrifice to the football religion.
Speaking of social sacrifice, the fact that we have fans who turn rabid and maul each other over whose team has won is a really interesting study. And the fact that we have to have so much security at games now because fans are literally fighting after every game, regardless of who wins and who loses, there's going to be a fight. You're expecting that there's going to be a mob. We've made movies about it. So just even as a culture, what do you see as things that are beneficial that are coming out of this genre?
Professional sports came in to destroy unions, and people would come together and stand up for their rights, and they decided that they could divert most of that energy into an us versus them attitude in professional sports games and make them regional, like I'm this region, you're that region, and humans are so not exercising free will, so easy to manipulate that
Everybody wants to win, right?
Yeah, and if you watch, the rise of the NFL was to promote the Vietnam War. And so they've had the flyover, and they tied it really close to the military because football players and fans are going to be pro killing other people for corporate land grabs, and now everybody, the people are still like, support the troops, is just a way of like, keep feeding the war machine. Don't come down on the people who are the victims of it. And you're just like, the war machine only exists because we're feeding people to it. How can we support the troops by letting them go fight for oil in Iraq? Or we know all these wars were on false premises now. We know the Vietnam War. Even Vietnam veterans aren't like, that was the most moral war and thank God we were there. Even they know it was wrong, but there's just such a confusion in their head about, but I did my duty. I love the sacrifice. I love that they committed to help humanity, in their mind. But the end, they were tricked. And they should be very upset about being tricked. They shouldn't be like, well, I was tricked, but I'm still a hero. And you talk to the heroes, and they don't feel like heroes. That's the whole thing. They don't feel like heroes because they know you can't abandon personal agency. If you do something, you did it. It doesn't matter. People want to believe
If
that
somebody made you do it, you still feel responsible.
Authority
for what you
told
did.
me to do something, so I'm not responsible for what I do. That's the Milgram study. You should see it when they got people to electrocute other people because they got wrong answers because a guy in a white jacket told them to do it, and then they interview them, and the people come to the realization, they're like, yes, but you pressed the button. And they're like, no, I was told to press the button. They go, yeah, but you're the one who pressed the button. They're like, no, I was told to press the button. And then they're like, I pressed the button. And then you go, yep, and that's your fault. And you go, but I was tricked. Yeah, you thought you exercised free will too.
You know how many times they did the Milgram experiment?
How many?
300,000 times.
Ooh, do we know how many times people chose to not press the button?
5% are exemplars who won't go along. Only 1 in 20 people
And
will
a lot
not
of those,
go along.
But a lot of those people were electricians or people who had superior knowledge about what the electric shock that was supposedly being administered. Nobody was actually shocked in the experiment.
Ooh, so experiencing pain will make you less likely to hurt others is what we're getting at here.
Or just understanding how much pain was being inflicted. Those people,
Yeah, they're like, hey, this isn't safe to inflict this much pain, whereas people who were ignorant of electricity just kept pressing the buttons. And they found that women press the buttons just as much as men, but verbalized their upsetness about having to press the button.
Complain.
I really hate having to press this button. I'm gonna press it anyway, though. Right, and that's the other thing that we like to highlight here. Like, women, we're still human. We are all human beings with all of these same driving factors. Nobody's saying that women are better than. We are all biological creatures. We are human beings, and human beings are inherently flawed.
So women might be as the same, might be not any more compassionate than men, but they're probably more likely to be a whistleblower.
Yeah,
you know?
the women make great. They bring down everybody because
What are those gossips? Gossips.
you know what I was made to do.
Yeah.
You know what my boyfriend's doing? Yeah, a woman took down Michael Milken. Ultimately,
And Enron, woman took down
a woman
Enron.
took down Enron. Yeah,
Disgruntled girlfriend.
She said, "I've had enough of your shit, disgruntled. You aren't sharing enough of the credits. I'm putting in the work. I'm not getting paid equally. I'm gonna have to, enough is enough."
but men are indoctrinated from small children to keep the secret of the abuser. And that's the thing is that boys, and part of being a team player is that like loose lips sink ships, and they have all these things.
Don't be a snitch.
Yeah, don't be a snitch. The abusers have a real way of leaning on the male ego, and men are complicit in their silence,
This equation of abuse to power. And vice versa. If you have power, that means you can abuse discriminately or indiscriminately and not face consequences. I think that's what most people here in the United States would define as power, and how much power you have is what can you get away with? How many abusive things can you do and not have to face consequences? And we also see that trickling down to how our caste system works, which is literally, how much can you get away with? Which I think is a wild concept.
All the way from the top with Rupert Murdoch, who apparently can get away with anything. As far as the caste system goes, I guess Rupert Murdoch is basically the top of that.
Well, and his sons are going to inherit it, and we know that intelligence isn't inherited, and nepotism means fools rule. And we've learned that over and over through the monarchies and royalty and all that handing down, and their belief in pure blood, their inbreeding that led to, idiot droolers. That,
jaws that don't close.
Yeah, and stuff. It turns out the mutt is the strongest.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah, we are.
So speaking of the idea of like the chosen one, and male-dominated decision-making, let's just take a look at Anakin Skywalker's journey from Anakin Skywalker all the way to Darth Vader, and also the woman who was with him and how much power she held and the decisions that he still made even though he had the options to not make them. Are you guys familiar?
Roughly.
Loosely.
Okay.
So, young Anakin, he is, touted as the chosen one. He's going to be the one that restores balance. He's originally, for the light side. Obi-Wan Kenobi is his teacher and his member of guidance. And, he meets Padme, and she's a senator, and she is very wealthy. And they get married, and they're facing all of this political strife, and he is of course approached by the dark side, who then tells him, well, no, the only true way to restore balance is to actually wipe out the Jedi Order. They're causing all of this damage, and like the buy into that would be to eradicate like a whole nursery of young Jedi, which he does, and he didn't have to. At any point, he could have walked away. He could have gone happily ever after with his wife. They could have disappeared. She had all the resources to do so, but in his mind, the grasp of power and what it meant for him to be a man, a real man, and to make his own way and his own destiny was to not listen to his wife. And not lean on the power that she had, because that power, which is also an interesting concept of, the woman will inherit the power of her husband, but it is not considered true vice versa, that if you are a powerful woman, that your husband then inherits and reflects your power. Silly concepts and ideations around partnerships and marriage. I digress.
And power.
And
Yes.
power.
And the-
Right.
But he makes this decision, and now Obi-Wan has to go after him. He finds out his wife's pregnant, and she's not with it. She's not with the dark side. She's leaving. He goes after her. He fights Obi-Wan Kenobi. Obi-Wan is like, you're a couple years too early for this, son, and slices off his appendages, his arms, his legs. He's lying, writhing on a lava heap. And then the next iteration we get to see is him in the suit. And now he's dependent on technology. He can no longer function as an organic being. And that's the rise of Darth Vader. That's when we get the, Luke, I am your father.
So Luke is the baby that she's
Luke
pregnant with?
is the baby. And then we find out it's twins, because there's Luke and Leia. They are brother and sister. So can you guys please stop with the weird cosplays? Stop it. They're brother and sister. We don't need to see this. But also, just a side note, interesting study of, like, we never see Luke in a bikini. We don't see Luke in a metal bikini, but we sure get to see Leia in her bikini, and seeing how she utilizes her feminine wiles and power to get out of her situation with Jabba the Hutt. So there's a lot of interesting commentary on what it means to be a woman in power in Star Wars, and that's continued into the current iterations of the film, which I appreciate, just as talking points too of what gender really means when you're in a power struggle for life and natural resources, because there's a lot of intellect and spiritual power that has nothing to do with gender. And we keep seeing those parallels play out of, it doesn't matter what gender you are. It doesn't even matter what race you are. There's all sorts of aliens and the representation of different cultures.
That's what I love about sci-fi.
Yeah, it's
I
beautiful.
I
Just
love
transcending
sci-fi,
this idea of, like, genderism within our societies. I was like, look at Jim, just like, yes, gender and society norms. But
And the exploration of them within these storylines.
yes, this
Yeah.
is media.
But I understand the first movies were made like in the 70s, right? So Leia was in a metal bikini, but that kind of portrayal is changing now. I find it hard to watch movies that are made before 2010, honestly.
Ooh, I think that's really interesting, because we have the character of Rey, and her costuming is very the traditional. She dresses like Obi-Wan Kenobi, multiple layers. They're in deserts, so it's everything's covered. There isn't really a utilization of her as a sexual object to tell her story, which I really appreciate. And it's also, as it gets darker and darker and darker as the series progresses, and we start to reach this annihilation point of one side is literally trying to eradicate and annihilate the other side. How do you fight back against that and still keep your humanity and still instill hope into the next generation? Which is the saga, is the point. And I think we are living through that here and now on Earth, us terrestrial broadcasters, of how do we keep hope alive in the face and knowledge of what is happening here on Earth, in terms of natural resources and in terms of human beings having one side really not see the humanity in any other culture that doesn't directly reflect themselves back.
And empire,
Empire Strikes Back.
But the question of empire, we are living through and in the most powerful empire that the earth has ever seen. So, I mean, we're very tiny people, but we are part of the big bad empire that's taking over the world and destroying the world too.
Yeah, the catalog of media that we have is larger than the length of anyone's life. So no one can embody everything that's ever been created or put together. And especially with the internet explosion and people being able to make their own media now. So that's why I believe you should be really selective of what you watch. Don't let the channel changer dictate what comes next to your mind, because that's your thought stream. And if you, like I'm saying about getting control of your mind and being a participant in your mental development, is that why do you let them just show you what they want? You think you're picking, but you're not. So you could study Star Wars and get in depth in the character development and what it reflects and the historical aspects that they refer back to.
Well, he was trying to. It wasn't Star Wars based on like the whole concept of Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey?
And he just
wasn't that
studied it,
what
Yes.
they were
Very
trying
much
to,
so.
Yeah, that's what they were trying to do.
Yeah, and there was a great special that Bill Moyers did where he interviewed Joseph Campbell for like I think 8 hours, and it's worth watching always because this is a man who studied the different myths and showed that there's. You could also look up how to write a script, a movie script, and there's only certain plots. There's fish out of water, which we always love a fish out of water story, and we like the hero's journey.
We only watch sci-fi.
Right,
almost
there's the
exclusively.
accidental hero who didn't even pick their adventure, and now they're on it. You know what I mean?
but sci-fi allows you to transcend, like you said,
But you can still.
everything.
Right.
Humanism, all genderism and racism and all the isms, but just even being a human, you get to transcend. And it's the genre where imagination of what is our human potential. That's where it can be expressed, I feel.
I love that. It's also the futurism that I find really fascinated by different iterations. So it's one of the reasons why I love Firefly so much
Right.
as a show, because it is really can be dystopian. You still have this, imperialistic side. You still have the light and dark side. You have the people who are able to conform, who have the wealth to conform comfortably. And what that means for, like, still the top 1%, they're getting planets that have been terraformed. And then you have people who are on the outskirts and who are on the fringe who are getting the bare minimum. And they're just like, okay, you fend for yourself and see what you do. And again, it's the moral implications and behaviors that we see and what we ascribe to those people who are dirty. Versus who are living in white scrubbed clean buildings.
I remember hearing a soldier in Iraq talking about how when he saw Star Wars, he thought it was about Iraq. He thought it was about Iraqi soldiers fighting against the U.S. He was like, "Wow, we were a ragtag team." And he said when he saw Star Wars, he was like, "Oh, that's who we are."
We're the underdog, and we're the empire. Yeah.
Oh no!
Yeah. Well,
Oh no!
Yeah.
Who do you associate and see yourself as in
Right.
this game? Which is funny because I was just at a couple's house, and they had a son who was 6 years old, and he was dead set on Darth Vader being the good guy in the film. And it's like, how do you have that conversation with a 6-year-older that, I don't know if Darth Vader has made the most ethical and like moral decisions.
But he's powerful.
So he's like, he's the hero of the story. And even if you watch it from the beginning, like, yeah, Anakin is the hero. He's supposed to be the chosen one. So if he's the chosen one, then he can do no wrong. And Darth Vader is the good guy. Like point blank period. I was like, all right, 6-year-old logic. Like, I'm not going to argue with you. Like, you're doing great. Like, he's going to be an excellent lawyer one day.
right.
Yeah. Well, I think the anti-hero or who's the other Star Wars character that had like a red head, like red makeup, and he was the villain.
Oh, they're Sith Lords.
Yeah,
They're Dark
right.
Lords. So they're basically Jedi for the dark side.
Well,
There's a few of them. There's like
Right.
Darth Maul who's in there. So
Yeah.
they all have like similar, just dark makeup.
But they made a movie where he was like the principal character. And I remember reading an article about how he sold more action figures and that kids really dialed into the power. And I remember being a little girl and I would get really attached to the female villains because they seem to have more power than all the other women on the screen. And I would always be like rooting for the villain, and she would always put in so much work for her scheme and not win.
I think I really love like the story of like Maleficent as a villain, and then you see her backstory, and it was like, no, she was abused. This man came and like took her wings and like stole her power. And this is why she is the way she is, and it like puts things in a whole other perspective. So like, what is really good? What is really evil? What are your moral quandaries? So
yeah, and that's like post 2010, right?
Like Medusa.
Yeah.
Oh, Medusa.
You know, and one thing about sci-fi that I like is that, you know, the solution to our problems here on the planet are not in outer space. The solution to our problems are in inner space. And that's why being able to take apart these media constructs is developing your inner space. Like if a person thinks that power is morality, or power is...
I think children just instinctually feel that power is morality.
Well, we all know that humans bond to their abuser. I mean, that's just the given,
nature.
you know.
Yeah.
So we're going to have to overcome that somehow, because if we bond to our abusers, then how are we going to get out of an abusive situation?
So this, because we have the capabilities now of individuals amassing enough wealth to essentially start their own space program, hint, hint, nudge, nudge, Elon Musk, and then we see failed experiments. We see, you know, rockets being launched that are just exploding within atmosphere and raining down terror, and it's typically being held in lands that are belonging to indigenous people. So Elon Musk's latest rocket was over Montana, and it's the outrage of all of these indigenous peoples who are speaking up, talking about how their quality of air is being affected by this one individual, how now their water is undrinkable, how they spend their time picking up shrapnel so their children can have safe places to play. And there's nobody who's holding Elon Musk to task for the damage that he is doing that will take years and years and years, if not decades, to undo. We're talking about, you know, radiation. We're talking about, you know, oil leakages. We're talking literally just metal raining from the sky. We're talking about acid rain. We're talking about all of these environmental factors that once changed are very difficult to reverse. And we are not thinking about permanence on Earth as much as we are looking to the skies. And also, how feasible is it for us to take a large majority of the population up there? So when people talk about, oh, they're trying to leave the poor people here on Earth, I was like, literally, we see this happening, and what are we going to do about it? Thoughts?
Well, the whole idea of a free market was anti-individualistic. Is that they believe that one individual can amass so much money that it takes away the choices of everyone else. And so as our rights and our options become more and more narrowed because a certain person is taking advantage of a situation. I mean, they were born rich or they have a patent. I mean, property rights are enforced by the government. I mean, none of these people can hoard to this scale without a systematic system holding them there. And the American dream was that we all can be middle class, whereas
or we can all be poor.
Right.
And Elon Musk can have enough money to rain shrapnel down on a less privileged community.
And a free market means that the political system and the media are for sale. It just means that they go to the highest bidder. If Putin wants to come in and buy up our top ABC, NBC, and CBS, the free market says, go ahead. That's what Ronald Reagan was all about. That's what the neoliberals are all about. They're just money talks, and that's all that matters. And they don't care about the distribution of rights, because, like I say, freedom of choice. Liberty is the freedom of choice. So the more choices you have, the more liberty you have. And our choices are being narrowed, like choices in occupations. I should have like 5 viable jobs I can pick from to contribute to my community and own a house. But the thing is that I don't have liberty. I don't have the choices. I have 500 channels. I have 14 colors of cars and, 5 car companies to choose from. That's my liberty? No. You can't actualize your choices in a market without money. So,
Right.
like all of us, there's a lot of unmet demands because there's no money to actualize them. So those people have no liberty. So this is not the land of liberty. I mean, people are under false premise. They're watching football and watching the commercials, and it's all set up to keep them ignorant. I mean, if you know the reason why the Roman Colosseum was built and what they did there, then you'd know something about your life. But, as long as people are just like, no, I'm going to watch Cold Case, I'm going to watch horror shows. I mean, if you're killing time, you're wasting your life. You're just wasting your life. Time is all you have to spend. Why don't you put it towards something constructive?
When did you mentioned earlier that professional sports came in to distract people and pull people away from unions?
They did.
Okay, so when did that happen?
That happened in the 1950s and 60s. They just realized that it was just too easy. These guys are like meatheads, and it's just easy to get them to go, rah, rah, I'm for my local team, and look at this boy, he can throw the ball better than anybody else, rather than, hey, we should all get together and make sure that our corporation are distributing the profits to us who are actually making those profits, rather than to transient investors who could be gone tomorrow, here today, gone tomorrow, have no loyalty to the community, no loyalty to the company, and they get most of the profits. Why aren't the workers who are like trying to educate their children, have retirement, own a home, why aren't they getting first in line for the profits? And that's because the media was bought up by the people with the money who are just distracting you and just keeping you from the reality so that you don't exist on the mental realm of participation in our culture.
This could never be said on network TV.
No.
Because they're never gonna...
I would violate my sponsors. My sponsors would pull. I would be blacklisted. I'll never be on TV.
No.
I mean, you're on TV.
So we should do a show like 7 things you could never say on TV. Because they've changed since Carlin's day.
Yeah, the 7 proposals that can never be said on TV. Yeah, I ask people, hey, someone my generation, do you know the 7 words that can't be said on TV? They can recite the whole thing. They're like so excited about it. And I go, hey, what about 7 proposals that can't be said on TV? And they're like, you know what? I didn't see that during the Super Bowl.
Ooh, so this would be the solutions segment of our show. So let's talk solutions. What can we do?
First thing we can do is that we can place a tax on advertising. Right now, the largest revenue stream, untaxed revenue stream in our economy is advertising revenue. And when a corporation buys airtime from a broadcast company, they pay no sales tax on the transaction. And if you put a 5% sales tax, a 10% sales tax, they would raise $10 billion to $20 billion a year. And with that money, you could publicly fund presidential elections. And if you publicly funded presidential elections, that means the person who enters the Oval Office has not sold off all their cabinet positions, all their agency heads, all their chairman commissions. Right now, a person who enters the Oval Office has already sold the agricultural department to Monsanto. They sold the transportation department to the oil industry. They sold health and everything to the pharmaceuticals. So right now, there's nobody batting up to bat for the public interest. And the other thing with that money that could be done is you could have the financing of public radio and TV shows. And the thing is right now we've lost regional flair. Is that the corporations are homogenizing us and demoralizing us by showing us all the same exact information, same shows, same commercials. Whereas if we had local radio and local TV on a scale of commercial, like 50-50, like balance the field, you know what I mean? Like half the channels on the radio are public. Then local bands could be, we would know them. We would know local artists, community activists.
Can you imagine?
We'd have local heroes. You know?
Right, but it would be a renaissance. It would definitely be a renaissance.
It'd be a
if you could
renaissance.
if like every local band could have a time where they got on the radio, that would be so amazing.
And the other thing that you could do is that you pass a high marginal corporate income tax. And what happens is that if corporations have to pay a high marginal tax rate, there's a way for them to get out of paying high taxes, and that's to pay higher wages. And what happened was Reagan got rid of that so that now they don't have to pay higher wages and all the money can go towards their investors. And that was, they're trying to create a have and have not society. The corporations are anti-middle class, pro-authoritarian. I say they're the worst of communism. They're financial collectives that pool their property and they create an authoritarian workplace that's tyrannical. And corporations did not have to move their production overseas. They chose to. And where did they choose to? To communist countries and dictator countries, because that's the system they support. They don't like representative democracy. They don't like egalitarianism. And they don't like the law. They're always breaking the law and finding...
They don't like the middle class.
They don't like the middle class. So, and I have a hard time that corporations have convinced everybody that they're the private sector and then there's the public sector, but then there's the personal sector and there's the commercial sector. And this commercial sector, you got to remember, corporations don't need fresh water. Corporations don't need fresh air. Corporations don't need forests. They just need a money flow, and it needs to be increasing. They're an extinction cult. They are an instrument that has been put together to end life on this planet. And if we don't fight back against the corporations have already taken over everything. The military, they've taken over the politics system, they've taken over the media, and they're running a demoralization
they've taken
campaign.
over the healthcare system, so
Yeah.
people can't even go to the doctor
Yeah,
anymore.
and they don't teach you to be preventative in your health.
And
They're curative.
the other thing is, like, talking to our friends who are doctors, they have to document every time somebody comes through the door and they sit down, because they're general practitioner doctors. So somebody comes in for a doctor's appointment and they have to document every single thing that person says to them and what they prescribe and what... If they don't document every aspect of the meeting they have with their patient, they can be sued. And so a friend of mine, she said, I have kids, and at the end of the day, I want to go home and be able to see my kids. So she said, as soon as a patient comes in, I just start typing. Because if she doesn't just start typing and documenting everything, she could be, her corporate overlords that she works for, she could be sued and she could get in trouble. And she said it would be, to document everything that her patient says to her and everything she says to her patient, could be like another 8-hour shift. So she can't just sit there and communicate with you freely and be a person. She has to be this corporate cog who's making sure that she is prescribing the right pharmaceutical.
Otherwise, she'll lose her insurance. So the insurance company completely control. If she doesn't prescribe what the new drug they have that is going to be taken off the market in 3 years because of the damage it did, then they'll pull her insurance and she can't practice medicine anymore.
But it's corporate. But it's a corporate insurance.
Yeah, so you have
too.
basically an insurance accountant and insurance lawyers controlling your healthcare. It's not about you anymore. It's about profits for them.
So
It's also surveillance, which is just an interesting thing. I was reading the other day, I was like, how many times a day do you think that you're being watched or recorded? And in a city, it's like up to 300 to 400 cameras, like times a day that you yourself are being recorded on camera. And then we're implementing that in our health as well. And we're already seeing what the damages could be of people trying to seek health care that is supposed to be private and individual. Because then it's like, well, who gets to see what the doctor is recording? And is that a violation of HIPAA?
Okay, well, can I tell you? Well, I'll finish the story then.
Yes, finish the story, please.
So the solution was that they have doctors in Sri Lanka who work in the middle of the night, the opposite of California, and she wears Google glasses, And there's actually a doctor in Sri Lanka writing down everything.
Yeah, she has a camera between her eyes so that everything the patient is
She's
saying...
actually filming every appointment with every patient. And she says when
it's a scribe service.
It's called a scribe service. And so she says to the patient when they come in, just so you know, this is being recorded. And they're like, okay. But she said, I was like, do your patients really understand what that means? And she's like, no, I don't think any of them know. Like, I'm using a scribe service, and so this is being recorded. Like she says,
the scribe is never allowed to talk to them. They'll lose their job. So they cannot talk back and forth. You know what I mean? So it's and the thing is that the scribe in Sri Lanka is being paid $20,000 a year, which is, and rides a bicycle to work and lives in a house where it's 4 to a room.
Because one of them talked to her one time, and then he was fired.
And then she never heard from him again. Yeah.
Because she was curious about what was his situation. And because he's, a trained doctor, so.
Right. So that's the other thing that boggles my mind is that you have a physician, because I was just talking to a doctor who was telling me that she's out in Texas, and she said there's 3 gynecologists, and they are the only 3 gynecologists that they handle like 4 different cities. So your options are only them. And could you imagine if one of those doctors now their whole role was to just transcribe what was happening? To me, it seems like such an incredible waste of talent and time that you could be spending actually helping individuals who need it, that you would go to school for 10 years, and that this is what ends up happening with your education, is insane to me.
But what if you have a UTI and they say, go home and drink some baking soda? Or what have they said? Uva Ursi is what they use in Mexico, and it's sold right next to the counter, and you don't even have to get a prescription to take care of it. And your doctor is there, and they've been silenced. That if they were to say that, their insurance would be pulled, and they would never get to practice medicine again. And yet they know that you could just go home and drink a cup of baking soda, and you'd be fine. And they're
not an entire cup, just a little bit of baking soda.
Yeah, how much? Anyway, but the thing is that, they're there and they're going to give you something that's going to treat it so that you have these side effects. They're going to have a commercial in 5 years that says you could be part of a class action lawsuit. And guess what? They capped the medical industry. We all know this, right? They capped how much they can pay out in fines. So they've already calculated that they can make $1 billion, but they can only have to pay out $100 million. So it's profitable for them to injure you and not be remorseful. They're not gonna, and no one's gonna go to jail. CEOs have to go to prison. They have to go to prison because that's the only way they'll self-police their organizations. The government does not have the resources to go in and find the bad apples. You tell the CEO, if there's a bad apple in your organization, you're going to prison whether you knew about it or not. That CEO is going to spend the organization's money to make sure there's no bad apples. Now, if that CEO is not going to go to prison for bad apples, that CEO is going to turn a blind eye to any bad apple that is making them money. That CEO is actually going to go out to dinner and pat that bad apple on the back and say, go for it, you're making me a ton of money, and it's only your neck on the line. And then it turns out, no, not even the bad apple goes to prison. They just pay a fine because they made $5 billion and they have to pay $100 million. It's just in cost-benefit ratio. This is what the corporate structure has set up, and the corporate takeover has taken over. I don't think people understand. We have incorporation laws. Mm-hmm. Corporations exist because they're legal entities, and we can change those laws. The reason why they call Joe Biden Credit Card Joe is because Delaware has really lenient laws, exploitive laws for credit card companies, that they can charge usury and all this stuff, and so they all locate there. Cruise ships are all located in Liberia because it says, hey, you don't have to pay your workers minimum wage. They have all this lax worker safety stuff. So they all go there. If you're a shady financial company, you go and get headquartered in the Cayman Islands or the Bahamas because of incorporation laws. We can change incorporation laws and we can hold corporations to higher standards. They're totally within our power. They just own the media and make sure that you never know this. You're not going to get this commercial during the Super Bowl about how you can make the world a better place, how we all can come together and stop these forces from destroying our children. I mean, my new analogy is that in the old days, you used to think, oh, when there's scarce resources, you put the old people on the iceberg and they went willingly out there so that there would be enough for the young. But the way corporations have it set up is all the old people are on the shoreline pushing the children out on the iceberg, and that's why I ask, they don't have any will to survive. They're going to extinct the species. They have no problems with that. All the incentives, everything they've lined up, their whole structure is to extinct us. And we're sitting there going, there's nothing we can do because we're waiting for them to give us the solutions.
So in terms of solutions and changing laws, can you do that on a local level?
You sure can.
Yes. How can we do that? Because there's so many different splits, and I think a lot of people get intimidated by even applying for public official positions, which is surprisingly easy. There's not so many caps on qualifications to be voted into some of these positions. So what can people do on a local level to implement these changes?
Well, states and localities did move to rein in the abuse of corporations on their communities, and it happened in the 1800s and the 1900s. But what happened was the corporations got it where they stacked the Supreme Court because it was easier to buy the federal government than to buy all 50 states. And so the Supreme Court said state laws violate corporations' rights because they're individuals. Remember, 300 cases using the Civil Rights Amendments, 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment in 1900. All of them were for corporations to override state regulation. 13 of them were involving African American freed people's rights. 300 were for corporations not to have to follow local and state laws of people that were acting in self-protection to save their community from corporate abuses. So right now, like sales tax is something that's local. So my idea is that large chains should pay double sales tax and locally owned and operated that are in that community pay no sales tax. And so right now you'd be like, hey, I could go to Costco, but I have to pay 20% sales tax on everything they're selling there, or Walmart or Marshalls or any of those. Or I could go down to the boutique on Main Street and pay no sales tax. So it's kind of a 20% off sale if I go and shop locally. There's the financial incentive. See, they convinced everybody that you're a bargain hunter, that price is all that matters, not how it was manufactured, not the morality of the owner, anything like that. A bargain hunter. I mean, just infantilized the citizenry.
But people are broke. They have to search.
And that's why I'm saying double the sales tax on corporations and no sales tax on locally stuff.
Right.
And then I'm giving the financial incentive.
Right. So you're saying we could penalize.
Not penalize,
but we could
just make it so that they're contributing. You got to remember when you
go have a punitive sales tax though on corporate outlets.
But when you spend $1 in Walmart, that if you could visually see that dollar spent, you'd see it go right out the roof and it would go somewhere else. But if you go down to your local boutique and you give that $1, you'd see that person walk down the street and shop at the local Thursday market, and then you'd see that $1 go to the tip for the guy who's playing music in the band and all that stuff. You'd see that $1 running around your community. Every time you go to a corporate chain, that $1 disappears. There's just a big vacuum cleaner. Every community is running a trade deficit or surplus with the outside world. And that's what we got to do is...
So you're saying just shop local?
Well, let's do financial incentives. When Walmart moves into a community, they negotiate with the city council to alleviate them of property taxes. so that they don't have to pay property taxes. So they're already at a financial advantage over local operators because they negotiated for, we're going to bring this employment structure. We want infrastructure to be subsidized. Like they may even be like, we want our electric bill to be half as much as everybody else is paying for a kilowatt hour. These are the kind of financial things that they negotiate for. So they already tilt the playing field in their favor. And then I'm coming through and saying, I'm going to double your sales tax. And they're like, hey, that's not fair. You're tilting the playing field. And I'm like, you started it. You started it.
Not you started it. So what would your rebuttal be for people who make the argument that we are at an age where, because mom and pops have declined, and in terms of relief, we're seeing a lot of environmental changes. Businesses like Walmart are more capable of handling real-time response than Red Cross is if there's a earthquake in an area,
Right.
if there's a flood. So what do you say to people like...
I would say that if a community had $1 billion spread between its populace, then they could react quicker to local emergencies than Elon Musk. But Elon Musk has $1 billion right now, so of course he's in a position to respond more quickly and beneficially because we've been deprived of all our resources, so we can't even help ourselves. So of course there are heroes because they stole everything from us, and now they're the only ones who can help us.
Ooh, heroes are not heroes is the argument. Ooh, okay, who's watching The Watchmen?
One of the things that happened when Clear Channel took over the whole radio dial was they immediately, I don't know what you would call it.
Voice streaming.
Yeah, but I know, voice streaming, but it's like robotic. Like what happened was local radio stations became where there was actually nobody there.
Just automated, fully
Fully
automated.
automated, being voice streamed from thousands of miles away. So in the industry at the time, they were calling them cheap channel because they fired all their DJs. They were coming in and just firing.
No, they fired investigative journalists as a business decision.
Thousands.
It wasn't a violation of free speech or
they fired
free
thousands
press.
and thousands
Yeah,
of
they're
investigative
just-
journalists. So what happened was, like, for example, a poisonous gas cloud was going to go over a town, and
there was no one there.
there was no one in the radio station. So the sheriff, the emergency responders they're calling the radio station. They're calling
Saying,
the radio
tell
station.
everybody.
And there's nobody there. So then they're trying to reach corporate headquarters 3,000 miles away and going, can you voice stream something to that local community that there's a poison gas cloud coming for the town? Because your entire communication system has been automated and is owned by a corporation 3,000 miles away. And they were like, no. There's no way we can do that. It's all automated, even at the corporate level. And so a bunch of people died because this poison gas cloud went through this town. And so I think after the pandemic, I heard somebody saying that businesses are trying to onshore. Like, we're not trying to send our jobs offshore anymore. We're trying to onshore the production. Because one of the things that happened was that the United States didn't make IV bags.
Or microchips.
Yes.
Or masks.
Right.
Or all these...
We don't make flags and we don't make hats.
Right, there was all these things that weren't made in the U.S., and it was a crisis.
Hecho en Mexico.
Yes. At least
It's hecho
Mexico's
in China.
close.
Hecho in China.
At least Mexico's close. You know what I mean?
This
At
is
least
true.
it's made on our hemisphere. But
Same continent.
yeah, so these corporations get so big that they create emergencies, and people die because we need our local communication structure. We need our local economic structure. We need all this localism. We need our local culture. We need our local bands for our psychological health. Our musicians need a place where they can be heard and where they can promote their latest album or CD or download or whatever. And so this diversity is strength. And we're losing that
Think
diversity.
about how much a local musician makes, and think about how much the corporate stars make. Now, if the corporate stars made 1/10 of what they did, they'd still be doing pretty well. And if that money was put in our localities and lifted up, we'd have a wide array of music. See, right now we're having it, mediocrity rules. They don't like excellence in our society. They don't even like, they just are pushing us down, talent, brain-wise, everything, because they want us to be sheep. Or feudal. But
the point I'm trying to make is that the corporate monopoly is not a safe situation. It actually is creating an emergency situation where we're in danger if we can't call our local radio station and say there's a poison gas cloud.
That's a specific example of one of the reasons that they can't.
But it plays out again and again because that poison gas cloud. Where was that poison gas cloud? Like a couple weeks ago. Remember that?
Lord?
Yeah, it was in Palestine, Iowa.
Ohio, yeah. I don't think there's a difference. No. Being in California, I'm pretty sure there's no difference. I'll have to fact check that for next week. But
you talked about Echo in Mexico. If the United States would have invested half the money it invested in China, and you know how it works in China, right? Like if I'm a company and I go to China, do you know how that works?
No, tell me how that works. Well, I assume just from snippets of documentaries and things that I've seen, where you have people who are working, living, all in the same space. You have a whole corporation where people are living stacked on one another, and therefore it's like your cost of living is...
Well, they have a monopoly on low-wage labor for the rest of... for 30 years.
Than here.
It's so different. Is it very different? We do have laws that say that, you can't have someone working and living in the same space, but we've actually seen corporations try to skirt that rule. Of
course, they're lawbreakers all the time.
Speaking of the Bay Area, Google essentially bought an island out near Redwood City, and they had their corporate building, and then right next to their corporate building they built apartments so that people wouldn't have to commute. And then COVID happened and both of these buildings sat empty because everybody worked from home. And then there was the huge argument of, okay, so now what happens with these two giant empty buildings? You can't just monopolize the land there. We have a huge housing crisis. But then it was also how ethical is it for you to have your workers be in walking distance of their office, and you're essentially making them work and live in the same space, and now you're not having to meet or raise their salary in terms of cost of living, because you control how much their rent is, and you're providing cafeterias, and you're providing all of these things for security, but now they are kind of living in indentured servitude because they can't afford to live anywhere else. And also, who are the people that you're bringing over? And a lot of it is the people who are coming from India, people who are coming from China to study over here, to make their money here and send it back home. And so in terms of corporations still not putting dollars back into the community, the response being of, we'll build our own community, is still not viable. That was my sidebar.
Right.
Well, I was going back to the chemical spill in Ohio or Iowa or whatever. The board of that railroad company shared all of their board members with the Clear Channel. And so it was this issue of Clear Channel Radio didn't want to report on the illegality of what this railroad company had done, of that they were going too fast and they weren't following the safety regulations or whatever. And so people who lived in the town of Palestine were saying, why aren't we hearing anything on the radio? And it took them 2 full weeks till the local radio started even addressing the fact that the train had derailed and the chemical spill.
They were the same financial company.
It was the same. It turned out to be basically all the same board members.
And no one went to prison.
It was like a shell. It was all owned by Clear Channel, but then the railroad company was like a shell corporation. And so the people of that town during that emergency were having a really difficult time getting information.
Speaking of getting information, so when this story first broke, in February this year, there were several train derailments, and they were posted as accidents. And then people were like, oh, well, like, it's really bizarre. And I have a lot of friends, like I said, on the fringe communities. So I have some friends who actually hop trains, and they're like, no, trains don't really work like that. And it's really bizarre that you would have several trains derailing in the same way on these particular rails. And then it came out, oh no, this was not like an actual accident. This was a controlled hazardous chemical burn, because they didn't want to have to actually pay what it would cost to process these chemicals ethically or
Right.
legally. And so then they become accidents, the same way that people might do insurance fraud, and a building burned down, and oh no, oh me, oh my. Now I don't have to bring this building up to code. I can just scrap it and put a new building that's already got all the new amenities in it. And so then it is the investigative journalism of what can a company get away with saying to its public.
Oh, an investigative journalist can totally break the story and have no one broadcast it. And that happens all the time. I mean, they call it spiking a story. They just take it like this. They'd say, oh, great story, never going to see the light of day. And that is why you have corporate media, to make sure that happens, And but what we're looking at is that profits are maximized by shifting costs onto others. Okay, so if I do something and I can't pay the fees, I don't want to pay the fees of disposing of it or cleaning it up, then I just shifted cost onto others. And one of the ways to shift costs onto others is to shift it onto the future generations. They have nobody lobbying for them in Congress, or nobody standing up for them in court. And so the thing is that, hey, why don't we just shift all of our toxic waste onto the future and just let them deal with it? And we'll maximize profits, because profits are all that matter. All that matter is money, and money's something we made up. It has no relation to reality or the world at all.
Well, that's why they say that environmentalism is very much a race issue, because whose water
Right,
are they
who are they shifting the costs onto?
Who are they shifting the costs
the
onto?
weakest people in
So-
society.
So this story about Elon Musk, Kylie, that you were talking about, where he rained down debris and everything, do you know where that was? Like, who did he do that to?
Specifically in Montana, if you give me a second, I can fact check
Okay,
and give you
all
the
right.
specific
Yeah.
town. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I'll tell you a story then, is that when Ronald Reagan got elected, he said that government red tape was what was crashing the economy. And what had happened is the Clean Air and Clean Water Act had gone by, and a new agency under Nixon had been formed, the National Environmental Protection Agency. And they needed to hire people to go out and test water, smokestacks, and catch all the major polluters, and rein them in. Put scrubbers on there, get them to stop putting toxic chemicals. I mean, in Cleveland, the river caught fire. The river actually caught fire. So it became the largest agency in the government. And that's what Reagan was talking about, is he said, hey, we've got to get rid of the Environmental Protection Agency, and we got to cut back on them. Well, what happened was Gorsuch, who is now a Supreme Court, his mom was put in charge of the EPA. And she said, oh my God, what I'm going to do is I'm going to zero budget the laboratories that do the testing, because it doesn't matter if these people go out and find out that these people are polluting, causing cancer, Love Canal, killing children, aborting babies, miscarriages, all of that, deformities, cancer rates sky high. The corporations can be protected if there's no laboratory that can even test what the people have gone out and done. And that was the Reagan Revolution, was part of maximizing profit and getting rid of the EPA. And then what happened was, the EPA was full of a lot of experts and academics who really were well-intentioned, and we lost them because they left the agency because of the hostile work environment. And so that's how these people are an extinction cult. And the corporate worshippers are really there. If the world ends the day after they die, then they planned it perfect. And I know that, most people don't realize that they're part of the momentum of this and supporters of this, because they're just watching frivolous TV. And you know what? Maybe the mass majority aren't capable of knowing, or they don't want to know, but I'm challenging you to learn something. Like, and you're like, oh, I'll go out and I'll buy something by Thomas Sowell or whatever. Those guys are all working for the corporations, the American Enterprise Institute, the Cato Institute, the Hoover Institute. They're putting out tons of propaganda to mislead you. You got to start using your own brain and figuring this out. Work backwards from what will perpetuate the species to where we're at. Don't go with them where we're at of how to perpetuate the species, because they're designed to mislead you. So, I know.
So speaking of misleading, okay, so I done some fact checking, and it was Montana. It's Montana, Texas. Yeah, so Montana, Texas.
Okay.
And speaking of, race relations and feeling as if it is totally fine to trash the Gulf of Mexico because it's the Gulf of Mexico, it's interesting, the propaganda also, and the spin that was put on this, because originally when they started seeing issues with liftoff, the rocket had a self-destruct. And so then they spun it as like, oh, like it was designed to do that. And you're just like, I don't think that's really how that was supposed to go. But also they didn't talk about what was happening at the launch site. And there were local businesses whose windows were shattered. And it's also just like city plannings, like where you're doing these launchings. There are people who live in these areas, and now their cars are being blasted by sand. You're not in a random space in the middle of the desert. There are people who live here, and people who are watching this blast off from an island, South Padre Island, and shouting "Go, baby, go!" Because they're far enough to not have to deal with the blast off radius and the consequences. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that you can look it up. It was the SpaceX rocket launch failure. It's a failure. Don't let them try to tell you it was planned. It was a failure. It was not supposed to go that way.
Well, we would rather talk about Buttigieg not showing up at the train derailment, or Trump showing up at the train derailment. Do you see how the media isn't going to tell you like what happened? I mean,
that shows how long ago we've seen the news.
Yeah, no, but that was the derailment in Ohio.
Okay,
and
right.
Yeah, that just happened.
No, but we're talking about the Elon Musk.
Yeah, but I mean, the media is going to spin everything, and they're firing tons of investigative journalists. What's last of it, and that's all because of the revocation of the fairness doctrine, so that they can just have people who do opinions on TV. I mean, you got to realize the cards are so stacked against us, and I want to be morale builder. I want to say we can do things. I don't want to be part of the demoralization campaign that they got going on us.
Mm-hmm. And you better get on Twitter. You have to. You better get on Twitter, because that's where everybody's tweeting. It's wild that the head of NASA is using Twitter as a way of mass communication, and to say brush that under the rug. We're just going to move forward. And tweeting is a good example of our shortened attention spans, even the limitation of characters in terms of how you can communicate in your mass media, because you're not really getting news coverages, and it doesn't really matter what the spin is, because every individual has access to a Twitter. And are you going to trust what the head of NASA says versus what someone on the street is tweeting about their personal experience? Mm-hmm. Maybe.
But if we had a tax on advertising, we'd have local broadcast stations, and they would all be working together to get the information out. Whereas now we just have corporations in charge, and they filter us. There's just no doubt. I mean, I'm screaming into the wind,
But the thing about corporations is that they're too big to be controlled. They're so much bigger than our government. So the corporations are bigger than our government. My thing is we should just focus on antitrust. Is there any way to focus on antitrust laws locally? Is there anything locally we can do?
Yeah, there's been some great precedents set in the 1930s by Thurman Arnold. It comes down to the Department of Antitrust in the Justice Department. And, I mean, there's legal precedent that has been set. And, I mean, it's there for anybody to read, right? And, I mean, they talk about it on the nightly news every night? I don't think so. So, I mean...
So what you would go to your city council and say, I really want limits put on corporate outlets, Costco, Walmart, Home Depot.
Well, I would say that
Starbucks.
The city council should start looking at what civic equipment is going to bring people out of their houses so that they can start forming personal relationships with their neighbors and get involved in their community. And so I would actually start looking, and they're bankrupting municipalities all over the place too. So, but the thing is that we need to look back at the Greek and Roman ruins of pedestrian designed cities, and the car is just so isolating. People drive right into their garage with their electric car door opener, and they don't even wave to their neighbors anymore. And
I'm noticing a big movement lately of people really wanting pedestrian spaces, and I'm seeing that coming up in news stories all over the internet. A lot of cities are taking roads out, changing it to a pedestrian stroll.
I mean, if we save humanity from itself, our great-grandchildren will be like, you didn't really drive a car, did you? Because it will be thought of as just this horrific. It was like, oh, did you own slaves? It's on that level. We're looking at how are we going to villainize the automobile so that people stop using it? Because
first of all, you have to have public transportation.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was going to say the infrastructure, because I can't go to my job and make my scheduled appointments just based off our transportation. I couldn't do it. And even to walk to my bus station, it would be over a mile for me to get to some place where the bus could get to me. So it's ideas like that where we're really extremely limited.
Well, they should have a car tax on the value of your car every year, like you pay property taxes, except that if you make less than $100,000 a year, you don't have to pay the car tax. But then anyone who makes over that amount of money, then whatever the value of the car that they buy, they actually annually or monthly. Let's make it like a property tax thing. Let's get creative with the existing structure.
And then that tax would then support
public transportation.
Pebble
Beach, all those people could be paying taxes on the cars they own for a rail system that goes from here to Santa Cruz, and no employee, anybody who works in any of these communities and goes over to Salinas, there'd be no traffic jams on 68 anymore. Can you imagine? It'd be beautiful.
I think it would also be a really interesting approach, but to get all of these SUVs and tanks off of the road, stop making them business
just
write-offs.
Tax them off.
Because you get to a certain point where it's like, oh, that's a tax write-off and I can use that. And it's like, why do you need a vehicle that's designed to climb mountains? You don't. In the city, for what? Why?
And why is our tax code rewarding the biggest polluters? Why is our tax code not rewarding somebody who drives
we should all have go-karts. We should all drive little itty-bitty go-karts. Little golf carts, we should. And I think that, we really should have, during COVID, put a stop on producing vehicles that are not hybrid, at least. If we're trying to really start the transition, we have the technology and it's accessible. Every vehicle should be hybrid at this point, and then moving forward, we should figure out what we're going to do to solve the battery solution, to solve some of the issues that we see with vehicles that are completely electronic and solar, and even vehicles that are running on vegetable oil. I remember in high school, this is back in my day, the projects for the car club was converting vehicles. So that we call them French fry cars, because you would smell them driving up. They smelled like French fries. But what a genius way to recycle and marry these two industries. So, you have a problem in the fast food industry of them having to pay for their oil to be recycled. Well, now we can just put that back into another industry that needs that oil, and so you're getting multiple uses out of the same thing. Again, just like that dollar that circulates through your community. It's like, now we are feeding one another with these industries.
But there'd be good jobs.
There'd be great
jobs program to build public transportation. There's great jobs in saving humanity from itself, and they won't allow that job structure to come into being. They would rather pay a man to cut down old growth forests than to have people building light rail from place to place. And I mean, that's the choice. There's a bigger profit. Every redwood tree they can cut down is worth millions of dollars. And don't think that they're just looking for the moment to cut down all of Big Sur, all of everywhere. Yeah, it's state property and stuff like that. But, James Watt went, and the first thing he did was he leased all the land around the national parks so that they could be clear cut, so the national parks could never grow larger, even though there was, plans that they would grow larger and larger. That's what corporations do. That's who they are. They're not, if they're people, they are horrible, horrible, horrible people. And, it would be really interesting if they rented a room in your house and then you saw what they did to your domestic situation.
Well, this has been another beautiful, uplifting episode of Off Topic. Thank you so much, AMP, for allowing the public to have a voice, so that we can be individuals against corporations, and so that we can really share our own personal experiences, our education, and some resources and solutions to problems that we are facing and problems that our children are going to be facing in the future.
Yeah, people are powerless because they don't know the enemy they're fighting. I mean, that's just what it is. They don't know what to do because the user is in control of the information they're getting.
That's what we're really hoping to do with this show, is just clear up some of the confusion, because people are not understanding why things are going wrong for them personally. They're not understanding why things are going wrong for them politically, financially.
Socially.
And there really is just one enemy causing most of the confusion, destruction to the planet, everything, is that some businesses are just so big that they're too big to regulate and they're too big to control, and they're behaving badly. So.
And the government subsidizes them and bails them out. When was the last time you heard of the government stepping in and bailing out a union of citizen workers? No, but they'll step in and completely bail out an entire industry.
Unless you mean unless by government you mean Bernie Sanders.
No, governments
Bernie's
are
out there organizing all kinds of unions.
Government is being used to keep us down, and government is what we need to take over to lift us up. And that's basically it. Government's a tool. It's only as moral as the hand that holds it. Right now, it's all run by corporate bootlickers on both sides. And that's who they are. And there's there's Manchin. And, a lot of those Democrats just vote to pretend that they're on the side of the citizenry. But when push comes to shove, they vote for the Trump tax cuts, So...
Well, this has been our May the 4th be with you episode. Here's to putting the power back into the hands of the people.
Here.
Solution revolution.
Solution revolution.
All right. Thanks,
right. Thank you, guys.
Okay.
De muchas tierras, de muchas tierras. Las bellezas son incomparables, incomparables.